Hey Tim, am I audible?
Hey, Karen. Yes, sure.
Cool, thanks. We've got a few more. Getting used to the time zone changes.
Yeah, that was a pretty wild TSC meeting, huh? It's like, oh goodness gracious.
Yeah, and then I was paranoid that this meeting would actually have been the same, so I was kind of I didn't know whether it was coming or going. So, of course, in Ireland now we have 3 weeks of short weeks with public holidays. So Mondays and Fridays are going to be on short supply for work-wise.
Oh, really? So you guys take Monday and Fridays off for 3 weeks?
Yeah, we have
Oh,
St. Patrick's Day
cool.
on Monday this next week, and, and I think it's Easter bank holidays kicking in sometime 2 weeks after that. So,
Okay.
hey Vance, how's it going?
Okay.
Good. Give a few more minutes to see who wants to show up. Hey Tal, hey Timo.
Hey, good morning.
Hello.
Right, we seem to have a little bit of a quorum-ish, maybe. So I'll recap. What I wanted to do was I had two things on the agenda this week, which I realized now I forgot to send out an actual link. It's the same link as the previous link, so you might have seen it anyway. I really wanted to discuss I did some experimentation with Mermaid again during the week, but then I went off and thought maybe it's better to take a look at some of the possibilities around code generation from Go Code. Found a library that somebody had already written to do it and managed to get some content that looks potentially possibly digestible. So I thought we would run through that for half an hour or so, get people's feedback. Um, and then I wanted to take a separate discussion on the topic of standards alignment with sort of stage 3 specifications and the disposition of the community towards that sort of approach. What's our view on what we're trying to achieve? Unless anybody else has anything to add or discuss, does that work for people? Okay. Um, Silence is assent. Share my screen. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's find the button. Screen 3. Let's go for that one. Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. Oh, it's the wrong screen, I think. What can you see?
Go plant
Wait,
UML.
here, go
Okay.
plug here.
Excellent.
Read me for go plant UML.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. That's what I wanted you to see. The screen sharing thing popped up on the wrong screen, but made me think I was sharing a different screen. That's fine. Okay, so this was the tool I found. It seems to have been updated, created a few years ago and updated maybe like about 10 months ago. It has a V2, so obviously there was a V1. You install it using that command, which works fine. And then you just run it with these options. I tried it with a few different flags. I've effectively run it across 3 directories. I've used this show aggregations flag, show compositions, show connection labels, show implementations, gave it a title, and hid private members. I'm not entirely sure whether all of these or what exactly all of these do, but that's more or less the experimentation that I've done. I ran it across 3 directories that are within this model gen directory in my the reason why I've put this in separate model gen, so infra, NF requirements, NF topology, and workload are the kind of the 4 directories actually that I have specified. Sorry, the reason why I had to copy them, maybe somebody from SIG automation will explain this to me. For example, in the NF requirements, we have this ZZ underscore generated, which, as far as I know, it comes from the code that's used to generate this sort of skeleton code from these structs. Is there a reason why we persist this in the Git repo? Does anybody know?
We need that for some of the
Sorry, Vim, you broke up there just at the end of that sentence.
So you need to have these to, otherwise Kubernetes runtime complains. So this deep copy function is one of the methods that is mandatory to be a runtime object within the Kubernetes API server.
Yeah, but my understanding was it was generated at build time. So I'm wondering,
yes,
is there a
but
reason?
it's very slow to generate, and without it available, if somebody just pulls the repository without it, they will get a lot of errors because so much of the code expects it to be there. Client code as well, not just server code. So it is standard practice to commit it, and if you make changes to the models, you regenerate it and commit it again. But it does need to be committed into the repository.
Okay, that's fair enough. Trade-offs. So what I did was, because it was putting a lot of well, I assumed it was irrelevant from the modeling perspective information into the models. I copied the directories and removed that file from each directory in order to generate the diagrams. If anybody thinks that's a bad approach and we should include that information, then we can go back and revisit that. The output that we got from running those commands was, I shared this in the chat for this discussion modeling on the Slack channel. So I'm sorry, I've just seen Eric is looking for the Zoom link. I'll just paste that in. Good. Does anybody have the Zoom link to put into the chat there for Eric? I can try and reopen some.
I'll handle it, don't worry.
Okay, great, cool. Yeah, so I put the three of the images into the chat, so you can look at those and zoom in on them and so on from your own perspective. This is the plant UML that gets generated. It's quite neat. Looking at the workload, we have, I just gave each diagram a title. So you have your title up there, V1 Alpha 1. Our NF deployment list over here uses NF deployment, and this is where I guess it does include the status and the spec, which is something that we discussed potentially, but I guess that's just a byproduct of the fact that it's reading the code and generating what is there. In the spec, then you have your provider, capacity, interfaces, network instances, and parameter refs. This also uses the interface config, the network instance, the object reference. I'm not entirely sure what this refers to. And then the capacity spec. Network instance uses pair config, BGP config data network, and then peer-config uses IPv6, IPv4 addresses, and data network uses pools. So it's very similar, I guess, probably more detail than what we were talking about in the previous diagrams. Any thoughts from anyone?
I don't find this especially readable. I mean, it's accurate. It's hard to look at this and understand the relationships, right? I know some of them, but I have a feeling that other people will look at this and have a lot of questions, right? It seems to be a starting point for, as I said, I think these diagrams might need to be accompanied by some text.
Oh yeah,
right?
100%, yes.
Yeah. But this is an accurate reference, right? Without a doubt.
I guess this.
But yeah, it's kind of hard to read.
One of my question would be, do we have a way to have the labels that are used on the associations to be derived from some semantic in the code, or is it only uses? Because usually the name and the label that you are putting on an association bears a lot of information in a UML diagram.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll just make a few notes. So, I mean, I guess it as you say, Tal, it's a starting point. Is this the sort of direction that we want to go in? And then I guess, do we want to evolve this toolchain or something like this toolchain to support more of what we need? So I'll just take that note. Sorry, was that Eric? Was it who?
So I'll answer your question, and no, not at all. This is useful. It is. It's very pretty. But this is reverse engineering, right?
Yes.
So this is good input for the process, but let's not let the cart lead the horse here, right? So good input, but really we need to independently develop an information model rather than spend like, well, your question was, should we be building on this and automating it? And no, I think this is a useful tool one time and as input to the process.
I think there might be differences of opinion on that in the group, but I'm not sure. Anybody else? Does everybody agree with that view?
Well, Tim and I have our hands up. I'll just quickly
say. Oh, sorry,
say,
I can't see the hands.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. Just quickly say, Vance, that this modeling group came late in the process, but it's not as if in SIG2 we haven't been doing modeling for a long time, right? So this is maybe this group here specifically is joining the process now. You know, it was kind of my initiative to start this and get more people involved. But we have been doing modeling for a long time in SIG2, right? Maybe it wasn't rigorous enough. Maybe it was a little bit ad hoc sometimes. But what you're seeing right now is the result of quite a lot of thinking, right? It was sometimes thinking at the seat of our pants, right, to try to solve a specific problem. But yeah, we're joining in a process that has been ongoing for a while. So we can decide to do it differently. And I'm agreeing with that, by the way, because I also think that we need this group to kind of come together and look at it. But this is not only our input, this is part of the collective process, right? So I just want to make that clear. Sorry. Tim's hand is up as well.
Go ahead, Tim.
So, you know, if I look at this with Plant UML, where you have, you know, methods and attributions as you're showing, it doesn't lend, and I compare that with what you showed last week, I think last week, when we were talking about Mermaid, where you just had an entity relationships, you know, and you were dealing with entities. And if you want to know more about that entity, you click on that entity and it goes to the actual code, which you're re-engineering back through here. So that to me was a cleaner interface and more understandable interface than this, which is the normal, plant UML try to develop, a class diagram, right? So to me, I think the information's already there. It's just in a different form and shouldn't need to be presented on a diagram. So, if I had two choices, I'd certainly like the one that you did last week with Merman, where it was very clean entity relationship. You want to know about that entity further, you go click on it and it brings up the actual code base. To me, that was a better organization. And the interactions were better in my estimation.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Any other thoughts, Eric?
Yeah. So good morning. So I try also to have this representation internally. So I like it. But now I think the question mark we should have all together, it's what is the objective? What is the target audience for this kind of representation? Because and we need maybe to ask people who would like to have this kind of modeling if they're happy with this kind of representation and so on. Because I discuss with, for example, with developers, they don't care about this kind of representation. They just go to directly to the code and so on. It's not important for them to have that. But for other people, for let's say functional architect or people who want to have a global picture, I think it's important to have this kind of representation. Just my question, my interrogation, just to be sure that this production will be helpful for our targeted audience. But for me, I like it. Huh? It's
Okay, there's a few fundamentals. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, but but I think that's what I was trying to drive at, right? Was that, from a reader perspective, we're going to read this thing through, with the associated text and the README. People, when they first start looking at things, they develop, ideas of entities and their relationships, and then they start working on the actual classes. And I certainly wouldn't want to try to maintain two places for the data, and I know the data is in the CRs themselves, right? So that's the CRDs. And so that's one point, right? And that's why I was suggesting, says, as you noted, was that the developers, when they finally get past that first MD page, they want to see the decals of what you've got, right? And so they're going to go to the page, the sources, to go grab it. So my point is that the faster we allow the reader to get to the actual artifacts, the software artifacts that are dealing with this, in this case, the CRDs, the better off we'll be. So you give them enough information for what they're reading, right? And then allow them to drill down deeper. That's what I was trying to express when I said I like the one last.
Yeah. Hopefully I've taken a note of that comment. Just a point that this is zero effort once the tool chain is in the build process. As in it literally executes in less than a second or microseconds in terms of generating the documentation from the source code. So this isn't actually documenting it in two different places. This is taking what is in the code and representing that in a diagram, and that can be done on demand.
Yeah, but I've worked plant UML enough to know that it gets ugly real quick. And just like this, it's to me, this is spaghetti, at this point, right? When I look at it,
yeah. In terms of what it renders, it can become pretty complex, yes. And I think that's where I think any of these tools are going to get problematic if I start doing a diagram, which includes, I think the challenge here is maybe, one of the challenges that we have is the diagrams that I created previously and the ones that you are commenting on. I'll just throw that up here now because I have it in the readme. It's not in diagrams, it's in readme.md. Should be select that side. Yeah, so that should be here, and that should be previewed here. And
so I'll, as you're doing this, I'll express my ideal situation would have been that we would have the ability to automatically generate something like this, but then be able to play with it right? So kind of like whiteboard it. So once it's generated, that we can actually, okay, so this is what we have right now. Let's think about how we evolve this to something else, right? So, you know, to use this input as something more malleable, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's our goal. You know, we want to think deliberately about the models, but you know, we can't start from zero. We're working in a project that already has 2 releases, so we want to work with what exists right now, right?
Yep.
Um,
And we don't want to have the diagrams get stale as things evolve further in the code. And I guess
yeah,
that comes back to maybe Vance's point that we start with an information model and then we should use the information model to drive the code rather than the other way around. And that requires, I guess, maybe a change in the ways of working. But if we're going to, I guess, iteratively evolve the models during development, then yeah, yeah, it comes back to how exactly we want to do that. Do we want to take an information model that we manage by hand, use that to decide on what code changes we're going to make and then make the changes to the code? Or do we take a model that's generated from what's in the code and then use that to decide how we're going to evolve forward and then change the models in the code and regenerate new documentation?
Yeah, I think it could be done on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we need a general principle. I think we need to be patient and flexible with what we have right now. In some cases, we might say, yeah, we can evolve this. In other cases, we might say, look, we really want to go back to the drawing table and rethink this relationship. I don't know, for example, BGP. I'm just throwing something out there, right? So if we, I think we, you know, we've been having a few meetings about, you know, the general principles of how we're going to work. I think all of us are eager to dive into the models themselves and start thinking through, right? We have people here who have a lot of experience with modeling, you know, and have done similar work in a lot of different contexts. And, you know, it's that experience that I'd want to leverage right here to make Nefio more generally useful and connectable, right? So, yeah, I think if we just start working, we can see places where it's more iterative and places where we need to more about ripping everything out and starting over again, right? I hopefully it won't be for everything, but if that's the case, that's also okay. If we decide that what Nefio has been doing in terms of models until now is woefully inadequate, right? Then we have an opportunity to say, let's start with a clean slate and design it. But yeah, we need to examine what we have first, which is what you're doing here, Kieran, with the diagrams that you've created.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do is fairly quickly get to a point where I can decide that we. So the reason why I started looking at reverse engineering was because we had a big discussion last week. There was a discussion around using UML syntax as opposed to this kind of and that was I started looking at moving Mermaid across to using a sort of a more UML style syntax. But then also auto generation was pushed to look at because we only want to do updates in one place. And then where the discussion comes back to, keeping them fresh, keeping them up to date, and keeping them relevant to what's in the code, because either developers will ignore them if they're not accurate, and they won't use them, and they won't be able to leverage them for that type of whiteboarding type of activity. That's the rationale for me starting to look at generating them using whatever tools are available, and this is the only tool that I found that does this with Go code. If anybody's aware of any others, then I'm happy enough to try them. Now, I appreciate, yes, plant UML is, particularly in busy diagrams, not the most readable. I'm happy to start looking at the tool to see if there are any tweaks I can make to maybe remove some of the details. So, for example, we could just have the names of the structs without actually including any of the methods or the attributes, and we could also maybe embellish the relationship somewhat. I think removing these external dependencies coming from the rest of the normal Go language would be a good thing to do. If people feel that I should go back to the Mermaid and just do this by hand, or look to find some tool or create some tool that can generate Mermaid, then I'm happy to take that direction as well. So do people feel that starting with this as a means, and this is again coming back to eventually, I think we do want to have an information model that we can evolve going forward. And that's where I spoke last week about what we're trying to do here is document what we have and keep it fresh with what we have. And then in parallel, we should think about a process as to, how do we want to keep our information models fresh and evolving forward? Is it through that sort of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 type of approach that an SDO would follow, or is it code first and then generate from the code and so on? I think that's a discussion that maybe needs to happen in parallel. But this is just a case of to get some information together that shows what we have and to keep it fresh. Shall I go down this plant UML route? Maybe make it a little bit leaner in terms of the information it displays, or shall I continue down the mermaid loop?
Jean-Marie has his hand up. Sorry.
Yes, it's a question. Would it be envisageable to have 2 layers of Go classes? One that is the abstract layer and the one that is the concrete layer, that is extending the abstract classes, and to have the abstract classes representing the level of information model that we want to deal with. And that way we would have the opportunity when we are evolving the information model to make sure that the code would be kept in sync and to have the information entered into a single place, and we would apply the type of tooling that generates UML only from the abstract classes that would kept at the level that we that makes sense from the modeling perspective.
Okay, that's the thought. Yeah. I see the comments in the chat about having both models, I think. Is that what you're saying, Vance?
Yeah. Even Vance was telling like that. See, you're actually, extracted the relationship from the code. And this is a true thing, right? You're directly taking from the code. So this is how the relationship works. It'd be good, yes, like what you told, whether some finer details can be filtered, because basically in model, right, we don't go up to this level. Here, only the attributes are missing, every methods are here. So, so if, just some sort of filter is available, I think, whether we can make it as an existing data model. Yeah. But I also want to make a point that, what Vance and others, was mentioning. Even I thought so. Usually, the information model, right, is designed first. After then the development starts. But we already have the code. But we should have a way to reconcile. So yes, this has to be an exercise, irrespective of what form it is, so that at least we can go to, okay, there are further more changes. This is a target like that. You got what I mean to say?
I think you're saying that we should have a design first principle and create an information model from which we derive a specific implementation, but that we also need to generate to see what we have so that we can evolve it.
Right, you're right. Because we already have the code. So there should be a way to know where we are.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that it's a good idea to get some higher level abstraction of this auto generation. That could be by putting in abstract classes, or it could be by just updating the tool to remove some of the output or reduce the level of output. And that in parallel to that, we also want to kind of probably by hand create the more higher level relationship diagrams to support management of an information model that we can use to evolve and plan going forward. Does that sum up what we've discussed? Maybe Mermaid for one for the latter and PlantUML for the former.
Yes, maybe I think there is a, I don't know if you know the C4 model. I push a link in the chat.
I do, yes.
Okay.
I use that a lot.
I think this idea also globally to have maybe a global view and then maybe more detailed view, and we may use different tool depending on the level of the view we want to represent. Maybe that can be also an area of improvement, but
yeah, I'd see this more in the architecture documentation than in the modeling necessarily, but I think it would be relevant there. When you look at the diagrams, for example, that Alexei has been producing in the that's, I think what he's doing is maybe in the kind of container view or component view sort of level
exactly.
Level of detail, and then where we're at is kind of maybe more into some aspects of level 4 for one of the interfaces. For example, if you're talking about an API between two components, then what are the entities that you can manipulate over that API? But I think that would be a good one to bring up in the architecture discussions. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay, so I've made a few notes. I'm just going to throw them up here. Questions that I've seen, adding more information to the relationships. There's too much information in the diagrams. The higher level ones are better with the drill down into the docs as a link out. We need to start with an information model. We need to figure out who the target audience is. Not necessarily developers are going to be using this. It would be good to be able to take this sort of model generated from the code and then manipulate it to use to evolve going forward. And that we should start looking at generating the relationship diagram either from some abstract classes or applying a filter in the tool. We need both a what exists and a what we want. Okay, anything more to add on that? I'll try and
I have a question, if I may.
Yep. Please.
So it looks to me that C4 is a software is a tool for representing software architecture.
It's not so much a tool; it's more of a paradigm or
it's a
set of
paradigm
principles
for software architecture. Are we
Yes.
looking at software architecture here, or are we looking at information modeling and data
information modeling and data modeling rather than software architecture is, I would say, aligned with what Alexei has been doing in the architecture group.
And so my question is the C4 principle applicable to information modeling?
My view is that it's part of level 4. I think if you're talking about information modeling in the context of C4, then it's at level 4 of the C4 model.
But I think our scope is larger. Right? We're modeling networks.
Well, I'm not sure. We're not modeling networks here. We are modeling.
Yeah, a software system.
Yeah. On maybe I'm not sure to answer to Jean-Marie that we are today. What you presented, Sharon, is much more data model. It's not really informational model, because we are.
But we're not modeling the software. We have to model the network that we want to build, that we're maintaining, et cetera, and keep a digital twin, if you will, of that network. No,
I disagree. No, Vince. Today here we are in Nefio project. We need to model what Nefio, the Nefio component. So this is what we are targeting in this community. I'm not sure that our objective is really to model the network in a broad sense. Other community to do that.
But I suppose we are creating a model that allows Netflix to represent the entities that it's managing in the network.
I hope so.
I would suggest that, yeah, this is getting a little philosophical, but network is kind of an overused term, right? Where we're thinking about the network writ large, right? Network can include all the business and, you know, aspects as well. So, you know, from the BSS level, right? But I do think I agree that we're doing a little bit beyond the network, but kind of the components that construct the network too and enable the network. They are part of the network, right? We're not just like modeling virtual links, right? We're not just doing connectivity. We're thinking about the kind of logical components that instantiate that network.
Exactly.
So I think that the truth is somewhere in between those two poles, right? Components and networks.
So we're creating a model. I'm just going to try and document what we're saying here. This is what I think. We're creating a model that represents the entities in relationship that Nefio manages so that we can create software systems to actually manage them. So the model is there.
I would even say more that this is specifically about Kubernetes, right? Let's not forget that we're Nefio's starting point is that it is an extension to Kubernetes, right? So we don't want to leave Kubernetes' basic concepts behind. We might have to in some cases, right, if we think they're inadequate. But our starting point is that we're not trying to develop a replacement for Kubernetes, right? We're kind of hoping to leverage as much as already exists as Kubernetes as we can, right? And Nefio diverges from Kubernetes only if we think we really have to in order to make sure we have the features. I hope people agree with this, right? This was kind of one of the, as I understand, the foundational aspects of Nefio. In terms of networking, of course, Kubernetes is miserable, so that's absolutely an area which we leave behind, but we still leverage Multis and other things. And I think in our diagrams, we would probably go down to that level as well, you know, Multis networks, etc.
Does that sentence sum up what you're trying to say, Tal?
Yeah, I think that's nicely phrased, if people agree.
And even I would say the extension, the expectation or the stake in the ground initially was that they would be modeled as Kubernetes resources and relationships between those Kubernetes resources.
British or American English is always a problem. Okay. That's the why are we here? So I'll take that a little bit further. I will try and see for next week. I will aim to have a diagram that shows both of the kind of the two mappings together in the one page. So I'll push up a proposal
on maybe another other additional also input. I think in ONI there is also some additional material that should be integrated in the modeling part. Typically, all the configuration part is now modeled as a CRD, and I think it will be good also to model it.
Where's that now?
I will send you the link, but there is in a for OpenAI interface network function. An effort has been made to model the configuration part, also using some specific CRDs. that are well defined in FIO, but are not very well documented at that time. I will send you the link if you want in the global FIO GitHub.
Is that an external?
No, it's not external. It's within FIO, but it's not in API, in FIO API repo. It's under FIO ONI. And you have specific API for that. I will send you the link in the chat.
Yeah, and I think ports as well is another aspect that needs to be brought in or extended out to support. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, that's a good question now, because this is OAI. Is this part of the Nephew, or is this part of OpenAir interface?
No, it's part of Nephew. It's within Nephew project. Huh? So.
Okay. I will.
Hey, Karen, check with Sagar to make sure that you're not pulling in something you don't need to. They may very well be Nepio things that they want to model right in Nepio, but Sagar would know that for sure because I know they have some stuff in the Nepio on the OAI side, so just don't know if it's a duplication or not.
Yep, thanks for that.
And I think also for the modeling part of Nephew, I think Wim is there also. I think Wim did wonderful work to model all the part of the networking part for release 1 and release 2, and that's something that could also be modeled.
That's not included in this thing. We don't have the all the network piece. Sorry, I didn't see it in the diagram.
I mean, it's in Tal's document, it was there for sure.
Yeah, like the topology and stuff like that. Right? So.
Thought I was generating it.
Yeah, I think I mean, in Tal's
Yeah,
document,
there's a data network, and yeah.
it should be there.
But
The problem that you have, I think, in general, is what is the philosophy around the model that we came up with, right? I think that's the thing that is not, I mean, what we do is typically the way it works in Kubernetes is what we do is we describe in each of the fields, there is a description for every parameter that we put, right? And that serves the description on how it should be used, right? That you don't capture here at the moment, right?
Yeah, and I think we didn't really intend to capture it here because we intend to capture that in the API generated documentation here.
Yeah, sure. But there is a lot of valuable information normally in there.
Yeah, but we're not actually doing that at the minute. I think in a lot of these, are we? So, like,
that's why I think the question I think we have to ask, right? If you do, at the moment we are trying to reverse engineering. What is the most interesting to do? Is it the relationship between the resources or the relationship within the resource, right? Because what you show on the document right now is the relationship within the resource, right?
Yep.
But there is also the relationship between the resources, right? So they both have relevance, I think.
If I may intervene, from my perspective, when you are doing modeling like that, the relationship between the entities are the most important information, even more than the what are the attributes within a given entity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes back to the users as well. At some point, you do need to describe what's inside them. Okay, that's definitely good food for thought. It seems that auto generation isn't a silver bullet either, so a little bit more
I
drawing
think
board.
the key question we have to ask, I think, Kiran, I think it was said before, what is the target audience we are trying to satisfy?
Yep.
And that will determine probably the best spend or initial time on what we try to do, right? So that I think we should probably nail down.
Okay, any thoughts then? Who should, I mean, to my mind,
Yeah, for me, to be honest, developers, they don't care about that. This is
yeah.
my view on what I share with them. They don't need this kind of document to work and so on. But for people, I think we want to use Nefio, to understand Nefio. I agree. We need to have this kind of modeling.
Yeah, and there is, and if I may, there is also that second purpose that was expressed by Tao, which is we want to use this type of view as a way to identify where we have not the kind of constructs that we would like to have and evolve those constructs.
Does that capture it? I added the first one.
I think that the first I would say is not really the developer, but
it's not the developer. No, it's the user of Nefio. Much more user of Nefio would like to use Nefio to deploy network function. It's not the developer.
Okay, I guess in my organization, it's network function developers who are looking at Nefio and trying to figure out how they can use it to deploy the workloads they're developing. But once it's in a CSP, then I guess it's maybe I'll add in a second class then. So
it's
users.
more we call it designers or something like that. Is it not a design?
Maybe the word is onboarding. So there's deploying and onboarding, right, as separate roles.
Okay. I see. Okay.
Arguably, developers of Nefio functions who want to use Nefio to deploy their workloads are users of Nefio.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are playing the same role as to deploy workloads. And whether the workloads is their own network function or network function sourced differently, from Nefio's perspective, I don't think it makes any difference.
Yeah, that's a fair comment.
Right. I also want to add, maybe Tim Vance can join. Who are the target audience of generally information modeling documents? Probably I thought, even the vendors, cloud providers, or whoever, to maintain consistency. I'm not sure. There are several information modeling, Tim, like in Oran, as well as Vance in several standards. Who are those audiences? Any idea?
Architects.
Yeah, the way I see this, the generated from code models that are going to be interesting to these guys because they're going to want to understand what's actually there and drill into eventually the parameters that they'll need to supply. And these guys are more interested in the information model that shows them the higher level detail, the higher level abstraction, and give them the ability to evolve it independently of the code. Is that a fair differentiation?
Looks okay, yeah.
By the way, I feel like some of what we're writing here is almost like a general mission statement for SIG-1 generally, right? I think from the very start, we've called it network architecture, but some of us considered it just architecture, right? So we're kind of delving here into that subtlety. I think that's probably useful for the entire SIG.
Okay.
Right.
The higher level abstraction here is the architects don't care about protocols or programming languages, those sort of implementation specific things, right?
Yeah.
They're building systems. They need to understand the information and the logical aspects of the systems that they're building.
Right. One more interesting thing, I know, because we have been involved with Sagar for OAI. There are 3GPP specified modeling for AMF, what parameters it has to be, from, and we are not following it. Even OA doesn't follow that. Forget about Nephew. OA itself, right? They don't follow that.
I had as a separate discussion point for today to discuss on what our disposition towards standards is.
Right.
And I don't know if that's 7 minutes worth of conversation or a good seed talk for the next. I know from the last time around, I've heard different opinions voiced in the few of these meetings that we've had, and there seems to be certainly in some courses a sentiment that we're building Nephew, and if SDOs want to align with Nephew, they can. That's the second viewpoint here on that bullet. And the first one then is maybe more where actually we have a working group who is driving towards alignment with ORAN. Do we want to push that further into, Nephew is a stage 3 implementation of an ORAN specification or a 3GPP specification, or I don't know.
It is perfect, isn't it, Kiran? And more inputs required from the experts here. See, if you want to make Nephew constructs popular, we have to take it to different standards. So I agree with the first one.
Yeah, but you could also go with the second one and say, well, Kubernetes became popular and then it was adopted as a kind of a de facto standard. So there's kind of a what comes first, I guess. But maybe this is a go ahead.
But the reality is that there are standards that are entrenched in the industry that we're involved in, and we need to align with those. We need to work with those. So SDOs are stakeholders in the process, and how do you want to engage with them? We can have a long conversation about it. Ignoring them, I think, would be a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. But I mean, I guess the difference is, do we start with driving full alignment and implementation of specifications, or do we go for use case alignment and best effort? Do we lead the engagement, or do we let the SDOs pull? I guess that was my question. I'm not even sure.
I think we need to start by use case, but I think it will be. I agree with Vince. We need to work with them. We should not reinvent the wheel, and I had a discussion with Sagar also on that topic. I think 3GPP did a very good work to normalize all the configuration parameter, and we should reuse them as much as possible.
What I mean, Karen, we have to be aligned as much as possible. But if something are basically, some constructs like intent, right, which is not yet ready in some standards, then, or some constructs like configuration as data paradigm, then we may have to go back to them. We still are aligned with the standards. That was my point. But we should not shy away in, making our own call in FA and then go back and try to sync with the standards. That's what I'm thinking. Otherwise, we will be force fitting. We will be force fitting. See, the next meeting will be very interesting. You see, right, where we are force fitting many things. So we'll start with the standard. For example, like if AM individual enough function, if there is a standard model available, let's use it. But if something with respect to the deployment, with something with respect to the Kubernetes, if something is there in the standards, we can align. If they are not there, then we can always go back and align.
So somebody just asked on Slack, the relationship with the ETSI standard, right? And that's an example of a standard that sometimes is very difficult to fit anything in the real world into, if you ask me. But I guess my general point, we're not a standards body. We don't intend to be. We're an implementation. So standards, whether standards should be our starting point or not, that's, I think a matter of individual taste here. But I think at the end of the day, we're not beholden to these standards. We want to interoperate with them. But if they in any way negatively affect our implementation or complicate things too much for us, I think that's where we don't want to change our basic system to adapt to them. We might be able to do shims or adapters or layers or other things to kind of map onto other standards. I think it's more about managing our relationship to standards rather than using them necessarily as our starting point for implementation, right?
No, but I think it really depends. I think it really depends. Because, for example, in 2GPP SA5, they are defining all the configuration element that should be used by the different network function. So this effort has been done, and they did a very good effort also to type every parameter, to define the semantics. For me, there is no reason at all to reinvent that. We should use it as
absolutely,
it is. And if we detect some problems, we can give some feedbacks to them to tell them maybe, okay, your definition doesn't fit well in a Kubernetes environment and so on. But for me, it's very important to keep this definition as a starting point. After, there are some questions mark how to reuse all the HCNAV, Mano stuff and so on. And I agree with you, Tal. I'm not sure this is.
Your point is well taken. Yeah, I would say not. We're using the word standards generally here, but obviously not all standards are equally important or equally useful. So I think it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
At the same time, I want to add, sorry, Tim, a very closely related point. Sorry to jump. We are not an SDO, but at the same time, the users of Nufio, right, they are thoroughly integrated with SDO. So we need to find, maybe internally is okay, but we can't just, say that, okay, we develop without it, because if you want to consider brownfields, then they will say already have a performance metrics sticking to one standard. So please don't don't make me change everything for your observability or Prometheus. So as far as possible, we have to align as far as possible, but not to lose the principles. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, no worries. Just Tim, maybe last comment before we drop, because it is the top of the hour and we do have another meeting.
Just real quick. So I would be careful, a little bit along what Kyle was saying, is that I can tell you within Qualcomm, we're actually having conversations with other organizations, such as our automotive organizations, about using Nepio to deploy edge workloads, right? We're having these conversations that are not telco related. So I agree. We use the things from the various standards bodies that make sense, but we shouldn't just say, hey, SA5, 3GPP SA5 is God, and I'm going to go do that, right? I'd be careful with that because, again, I think Nepio was intended. I hope that it's intended, at least that's the way we're positioning it within Qualcomm, as a multi-industry way of orchestrating workloads, right, and deploying workloads. So unless that's no longer our scope and it's only telco, then okay. But if it's more than telco, then I think we got to be careful when we say we're going to use pieces from various standards bodies.
Okay, hopefully that last line there captured what you're saying there. I do agree with it myself. Okay, thanks everybody. Good conversation as usual. Hopefully we're making a bit of progress and getting to some consensus, and I'll try and have something tangible next week. Thanks very much.
Right. And very good work, Kiran. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.